chief made a decision with life or death consequences, end quote. Professor Blackman drew the following relevant conclusion from this and other historical events. He said, politicians routinely promote their understanding of the general welfare while in the back of their minds considering how these actions will affect their popularity. Often the two concepts overlap. What's good for the country is good for the official's re-election. All politicians, he said, understand that dynamic. Like all human beings, presidents and other politicians persuade themselves that their actions, seen by their opponents as self-serving, are primarily in the national interest. In order to conclude that such mixed motive actions constitute an abuse of power, opponents must psychoanalyze the president and attribute to him a singular self-serving motive. Such a subjective probing of motives cannot be the legal basis for a serious accusation of abuse of power that could result in the removal of an elected president. Yet, this is precisely what the managers are claiming. Here's what they said. Quote, whether the president's real reason, the ones actually in his mind, are at the time legitimate. What a standard. What was in the president's mind, actually in his mind? What was the real reason? Would you want your actions to be probed for what was the real reason why you acted? Even if a president were, and it clearly shows, in my mind, that the framers could not have intended this psychoanalytic approach to presidential motives to determine the distinction between what is impeachable and what is not. And here I come to a relevant and contemporaneous issue. Even if a president, any president, were to demand a quid pro quo as a condition to sending aid to a foreign country, obviously a highly disputed matter in this case, that would not by itself constitute an abuse of power. Consider the following hypothetical case that is in our news today as the Israeli Prime Minister comes to the United States for meetings. Let's assume a Democratic president tells Israel that foreign aid authorized by Congress will not be sent, or an Oval Office meeting will not be scheduled unless the Israelis stop building settlements. Quid pro quo. I might disapprove of such a quid pro quo demand on policy grounds, but it would not constitute an abuse of power. Quid pro quo alone is not a basis for abuse of power. It's part of the way foreign policy has been operated by presidents since the beginning of time. The claim that foreign policy decisions can be deemed abuses of power based on subjective opinions about mixed or sole motives, that the president was interested only in helping himself, demonstrate the dangers of employing the vague, subjective, and politically malleable phrase abuse of power as a constitutionally permissible criteria for the removal of a president. Now, it follows from this that if a president, any president, were to have done what the Times reported about the content of the Bolton manuscript, that would not constitute an impeachable offense. Let me repeat.
Alan Dershowitz, professor emeritus at Harvard Law School, and improbably